Hello, this is Deacon Joseph Swaden. We are starting the broadcast for Orthodox Apologetics Live. I thought Father Enoch would be here. He's not here yet. I assume he probably got busy doing something else. It happens. He's a monastic. Makes sense. This episode, I'll be honest, I'm a little tired because I've just been busy with a lot of things. So I put this in. We'll discuss a little bit about the veneration of the Theotokos. I have a few questions. Most of them a few of them come from Scooter from God Save the Tsar, and he actually has a question, and a few of them they're actually related. Um, Basically, it came from a discussion that was being held earlier today. Um, with Eric Ibarra, who we are going to have on our show next week, about the question of how we are supposed to see, how we're supposed to receive people in. Whether should they be received by baptism, should they be received by cremation, by confession? Now, in practice, the answer to the question is all three. At any given point, there have been people being received from heresy by any of those three means. So, I wanted to. There was a few different threads that we actually dealt with on the war zone, and that's one of them. The other one, another one, being that of Kirill Lucaris, and I wish Father was here to discuss that more because we had a spirited discussion on that, and I think he'd have a lot to say. So we will start with. I'm going to start with that first question because it came up, and that was, basically what I was trying to explain, if you are in the war zone and you were seeing this discussion, is that the most important thing to remember is that historically Orthodoxy has kind of taken almost two positions on the question of heterodox mysteries. The answer to the question in both cases is bad. In other words, if they're not mysteries within the church, they are not helpful to salvation. One of the things that is kind of I guess you could say, a difference of opinion, I guess, in these two different schools of thought, and one of them is a minority school of thought, and the other one's a majority school. In the minority school of thought, the question is, if there's grace in the mystery outside of the church, a baptism or a Eucharist outside of the church, if they are outside the church, how can that mystery help them? And the answer to that question is, for those who do take a minority position that in fact there is a mystery, that mysteries can be held outside the church. And basically, the position, as kind of explained by St. Augustine and others, is that if that's the case, then they're damned. It hurts them. Now, it's an interesting thing because there's even a canon which talks about the blessings of heretics. And in Greek, the canon is rendered, the blessing of heretics are not blessings. But in Latin, the phrase is rendered, the blessing of heretics are cursings. Now, that seems to be a slight difference, but the point is that difference, it does change things. And so there were people in the church, and there are people in the church who hold to those two different positions. The majority position, of course, being that heretics have no power to baptize or anything outside the church. And so basically we're using empty forms has become the dominant position in Orthodoxy. But just like when we're dealing with the question of Enoch and Elijah, the majority of the church fathers teach that Enoch and Elijah will appear at the end, but a minority do teach that it's Moses and Elijah. Does that mean that a person's a heretic for believing? No. And so ultimately, what I was suggesting to Scooter, and I'm going to read it out here, is from the book Christianity or the Church, which amazingly is on orthodoxinfo.com. But the point is, I'm going to just put a quick link up to it because it is a fantastic read. It's a lot more fun in book form than it is. It's kind of a pretty fat booklet. But in any case, if you go through it, this very thing, the difference in opinion between Saint Cyprian, who felt that there was nothing outside the church, and Saint Augustine, who felt that there was stuff outside the church, and he basically harmonizes the two. And so what he says is, according to the words of St. Cyprian, to be a Christian means to belong to the visible church and to submit to the hierarchy which God has placed in it. The church is the realization of Christ's love, and any separation from the church is a violation of this love, in which both heretics and schismatics sin equally. This is the basic thought of his treatise on the unity of the Catholic Church. The same idea is constantly repeated in the letters of the same Holy Father. Christ granted us peace. He commanded us to be in harmony and unanimity. He commanded that we preserve inviolably and firmly the bond of affection and love. Whoever violates the love of Christ by faithless dissent will no longer belong to Christ. He who does not possess his love does not possess God either. Those who do not desire to be unanimous in God's church cannot abide with God. Heretics and schismatics do not have this love, i.e., the basic Christian virtue, and thus they are Christian in name only. Heretics and schismatics preserve neither the unity of the church nor brotherly love. They act against the love of Christ. Marcion, who joined with Novatian, became an enemy of charity and love. It is well known that the heretics have deviated from the love and unity of the universal church. What unity is observed, what love is preserved, or what love is dreamt about by one having given up himself up to fits of dissension, cleaves the church, destroys faith, troubles the peace, eradicates love, and profanes the sacraments. St. Cyprian even expressed the decisive thought that not only can there be no Christian life outside the church, but there can be no Christian teaching either. The pure faith exists only in the church. St. Cyprian also calls the church by the name truth, and teaches that the unity of the faith cannot be separated from the unity of the church, for truth is one even as the church is one. And so, effectively, St. Cyprian goes further and explains that those who separate themselves from the church and who act against the church are antichrists and heathens. Here, for example, is what St. Cyprian writes to Antonius concerning Novatian. Quote, "You have desired, most beloved brother, that I write you concerning Novatian, what heresy he has introduced. Know that, first of all, we must not be curious about what he teaches when he is teaching outside the church. No matter who or what he is not a Christian as soon as he is not in the church of Christ." End quote. How can anyone be with Christ if he does not dwell within the bride of Christ, if he is not found in his church? End quote. And this continues, and he says, it continues on. St. Cyprian's conviction about the invalidity of any baptism outside the church and about the necessity of once again baptizing converts to the church was summed up by a local council of the church which met at Carthage in 256 AD, with Cyprian himself siding. In his closing address, summing up the council's decisions, the saint says, heretics must be baptized by a baptism solely of the church so that they can change from enemies to friends and from antichrist to Christians. The above stated views of St. Cyprian, which evidently the entire Carthaginian council shared, clearly and profoundly witness how totally fused the church was with Christianity and vice versa in the 3rd century. Now, this is a very important point because this is really the purpose of this book, is that the concept of, as St. Hilarion, the new martyr, is expounding through the different fathers of the church, is that the Christianity as a concept separated from the body of Christ, from the real church, is nothing. It is not the church. It's out. It's not. It's not an existing concept. And so he points this out, and then he says, not all of the views of St. Cyprian were completely accepted by the church. In particular, his teaching about the necessity to rebaptize even schismatics upon their conversion of the church was modified. On this point, the views of Blessed Augustine differ somewhat, although his view of the relationship to Christianity to the church remains exactly the same. Blessed Augustine held that the Christian teaching, understood theoretically, can be preserved outside the church. Truth remains truth even though an evil person might express it. For even the demons confessed Christ, just as did the Apostle Peter. Gold is doubtlessly good, and it remains gold even when it's taken by a thief, even though it serves different aims for him. Christ once said to his disciples, "He that is not against us is for us." From this, it is to be concluded that one who stands outside the church on some things is not against the church and has something of the church's wealth. The Athenians, however, honored the unknown God, Acts 17:23, and the Apostle James testified that even the demons believe, James 2:19, and they are, of course, outside the church. In his works against the Donatists, Blessed Augustine argues in detail for the validity of schismatic baptism. If, however, it is possible to preserve true teaching outside the church, and even if the sacraments performed in schism from the church are valid, then is the church really necessary? Is salvation not possible outside the church? Does not Blessed Augustine make a distinction between Christianity and the church? To all of these questions, a negative reply is given in the system of Blessed Augustine. He describes Christian life, which leads to salvation, only to the church. Outside the church, this life cannot exist. All the wealth of which the church is possessed by those who have separated from the church brings them absolutely no benefit, but only harm. Why is this so? Because, answers Blessed Augustine, all those who have separated from the church do not possess love. Christ gave a sign by which it is possible to recognize his disciples. This sign is not Christian teaching, not even the sacraments, but only love. Thus he told his followers, by this all men shall know ye are my disciples, that if ye have love one to another. The mysteries will not save if the one receiving them has no love. The apostle says, quote, if I know the mysteries, sacraments, and possess love, I am nothing. Even Caiaphas prophesied, but he was condemned. The act of separation from the church is the greatest sin, which proves that schismatics do not have love. One who is reborn in baptism but does not unite with the church receives no benefit from baptism because he possesses no love. Baptism can be beneficial for him only when he unites with the church. The grace of baptism cannot cleanse from sin one who does not belong to the church. Its actions are if it's paralyzed by the obstinacy of a schismatic heart and the evil of schism. Since one who is baptized outside the church displays his sinfulness in the absence of love in him immediately after baptism, by entering into the darkness of schism, the sins quickly return upon him. The fact that forgiven sins return if there is no brotherly love is clearly pointed out by the Lord when he spoke of the servant whom the master forgave 10,000 talents. When this same servant did not take pity upon his fellow who owed him only 100 dinars, the master demanded the payment of all that was owed him. Just as his servant had received forgiveness of the debt for a time, so one who is baptized outside the church is also freed from his sins for a time. Since, however, he remains outside the church even after baptism, all his sins which he have committed before being baptized are again imposed upon him. His sins are only forgiven when he, through love, unites with the church. Schismatics are deprived of the hope of salvation, not only because their baptism is invalid, but also because they are outside the church and in enmity with it. The grace of the Holy Spirit can be received and preserved only by one who is united in love with the church. He who is separated from the church does not have love. He who does not love the unity of the church does not have God's love. It is in vain that he declares that he has the love of Christ. Love can only be preserved in the presence of the unity of the church because the Holy Spirit revives only the body of the church. There can be no lawful and sufficient reason to separate from the church. He who separates from the church does not possess the Holy Spirit, just as a severed member of the body does not possess the spirit of life, even though it preserves its former identity for some time. Thus, while all who have separated from the church oppose it, they cannot be good. Although their behavior might appear to be praiseworthy, the very fact of their separation from the church makes them evil. Thus, according to the teaching of Blessed Augustine, the church is a concept narrower than Christianity, which is only understood in the sense of abstract theses. It is possible to be in accord with these abstract theses while still remaining outside the church. But for unity with the church, the accord of will is indispensable, consensio voluntatum. It is evident that without this latter, abstract accord with Christian teaching alone is completely useless, and there is no salvation outside the church. The points of view of St. Augustine and St. Cyprian can be seen to differ somewhat, but they both arrive at exactly the same conclusion. Outside the church, there is no salvation. People who are saved by their love, which is the grace of the New Testament. Outside the church, it is impossible to preserve love because it is impossible to receive the Holy Spirit. Now, the reason I brought that up is because you will find two divergent viewpoints on the question of baptism, but the end result has to always be the same. In other words, you can say, for example, that a false baptism or a baptism outside the church can be redeemed through grace. There's no one's denying that, and that's the majority view. You can even say, as St. Augustine did, that perhaps there is some action that occurs outside the church in a heretical or schismatic baptism, but it's to their destruction. So is that better or worse? I'm not sure. In the end, that is the difficulty of the question. So both of those positions have to some degree been taken for different reasons, different groups of heretics, different groups of schismatics over the centuries. And so recognizing that is simply recognizing a historical reality. Um, let me see here. Now let me see first before I get back to Scooter's next question. So what should our approach be with those outside? Um, well, we're not under a state of persecution, at least in the West. So we should try to be inviting them to the true church, Sean. I think that that's the best thing to do. And I think it's the only thing we can do. And to try to live by example so that our example is one that makes people want to come to the church. If I take a look here at this, I'm taking a look at the next question because I want to take a look here because I know that we had a Let's see here. Father, if the Church of Constantinople in the 18th century was apostate and the Russian Church was teaching Roman Catholic sacramentology, where was the Church? Well, remember that the Church was all still formally in communion with each other, and the parts of it that were doing these awful things, many of them were anathematized by Mount Athos and others. So it was a chaotic period even then. We tend to think of, the church as being in relative peace until the 20th century, and that's not true. The church has constantly been in strife with the world. For 20 centuries. That's not going to change. What changes is the nature of the assault upon the church. But that there is an assault upon the church is always real. So, I hope that that helps answer with that. And let me think here. I think, was that, oh yeah, there's one more question to answer. Let me see. If there are no sacraments outside the church and someone ipso facto loses their office by way of heresy, how can we ever know that we're receiving true sacraments? Well, no one ipso facto loses their office by way of heresy outside of, I'd say full-on apostates. But again, the question becomes, the church still applies. Is he a secret heretic? If he's a secret heretic or a secret idolater, then the grace would pass, on. If he becomes openly a heretic, those who unite with him fall with him. So if somebody loses their way by, their office by way of heresy, and people follow that heresy, then they're condemned with him. So what they need to do is they need to go to a priest or a bishop that's confessing the true faith. And most of the controversies, whether in the post-Nicene period, whether in the post, iconoclastic period, so on and so forth, dealt with people having this very same problem. And eventually, the Orthodox faith being restored, everyone came to an accord later. So that would be the answer to that question. Our responsibility, according to Canon 15 of the First Second Council, of course, is that if someone is preaching heresy, then it's time to go find a bishop who isn't. And there will always be bishops who are, preaching the truth. Okay. So that touches on our opening questions. Basically, this was going to be an episode about the Theotokos. I was hoping that Father Enoch would be here for that because he's very good with the data. Okay, we have another question. If there are no sacraments outside the church, then why are heretics often accepted without rebaptism? For example, RC priests are sometimes not even ordained, but just start serving, some chrismated, etc. Well, no, that's it's a little. What you're saying is a little bit inaccurate. I'm going to explain why. In the first place, heretics are often received either through one of three rites, the most common being baptism, but also if their form is identical, as with uniates and with older Roman Catholics, you can do chrismation. And even in some cases, they were received in by confession. But the whole idea is that the mystery they received from the church filled the empty vessel of the old sacrament that they received outside the church with grace. Or RC priests are sometimes not even ordained, but just start serving some Chris. Okay, I don't know if unless it's an ecumenist kind of situation. I've never heard of a Roman Catholic priest just walking in and starting serving. They can be vested. There is an order of vesting in the Russian Book of Needs. I would not say that they just, they're like, come on in, just start to. That doesn't happen. And that is in a case usually where there's a huge community that's being brought in, and that's usually where you find these cases where people are like, well, do we have to baptize everyone over if we know that all their baptisms were done properly? Can we just chrismate them? It's in cases like that. If you look in, the case of St. Alexis Toth in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was a case where mass reception required, it required a simpler form. Yes, but that's not. But it's also not always true. In most cases now, Roman Catholic priests, first off, if they aren't given hierothesia, which is, I think that's less common than one would assume, then they are at the very least, the vesting is a way that it becomes like being received by confession. So, the point is the ordination takes on the grace, just like the baptism would take on the grace if a person, was baptized outside the mysteries of the church. So these are economies. Um, Sean Ridlin asks, if my priest is good and my bishop is good, do I need to worry about the patriarchs they commemorate or other bishops they may be in communion with? Well, that's a tough question. My personal view, of course, obviously, I am not in communion with World Orthodoxy, is that yes, you do. Does the canon say that? Technically, it does not. So I know a few very good um, apologists in World Orthodoxy who are against ecumenism, so on and so forth. But they're like, my bishop's fine. If you're following the letter of the law, you could say that's a pass. My personal view is, but you're still in communion with people who are doing ecumenism. It's still a problem. But I'm not them, so I can't speak for them, and that's the tricky part of the whole thing. The key is that the Orthodox faith has to be preserved, and ultimately, you're absolutely right. What it comes down to is what your conscience tells you. If you'd have to know your priest, you'd have to know your bishop, you'd have to know that they're both good and they're both Orthodox somehow. Because a lot of people say, "Well, my bishop's fine," and they might have met him once at some event, but that's not a really good um marker. It's so that's a tricky thing. Is it true that Rocor recognizes grace in the Synod of Milan? Well, I assume you mean our synod because there is no Synod of Milan anymore. But in any case, they recognize. I know they recognize our texts, and I think they work very hard to try to pull in our clergy. They a few years back, about a decade ago, they tried to take in like 7 of them. But the point is, usually, again, the motivations have to be there. I question what the motivations were in many cases. Um, there's a big plus that comes with officiality, and so I don't know. I've never asked them what their official position is. I would presume that the answer is probably no, just as because that's the basic rule. If you don't recognize us and we don't recognize you, the laws on the books just basically say you can't really recognize grace in a synod like that. So I would be very confused. I think that they did back when before they joined with the Moscow Patriarchate. There were occasional touches back and forth between the various groups, but not since the Union, I don't think, because they even broke off with all the other synods that they were a part of. So I have no idea. You'd have to ask somebody in Rocor, and I'm not them. So let's see here. I think that that's basically the answers that we have here for now, and I'm not feeling well. But I did say that we would talk about the Theotokos. Probably the most interesting thing I think we can talk about when we're looking at the Theotokos. I thought it was great, really good that somebody on the War Zone actually put up a fragment. And I don't know if you saw that. It's the fragment that was produced in 250 AD. And in it, it contains prayers that Orthodox use in the veneration of the Theotokos now. Now, this is an important distinction because AD 250 was before, it was decades, almost over a half century before I guess you could say the legalization of Christianity. So, if you look at let me see here. If you look at the papyrus in it's in, I guess, the John Ryland's library, and what it says is, beneath thy compassion we take refuge, O Theotokos. Do not despise our petitions in times of troubles, but rescue us from dangers. Only pure one, only blessed one. That means that literally less than 200 years after the apostolic fathers died, you have Christians referring to the Theotokos as only pure one and only blessed one. More importantly, we know that on the catacombs themselves, they recognized martyrs. So what you can put together from that, and again, I am kind of, I was kind of hoping that Father Enoch would be around on this because, I frankly was not prepared today. And I got hammered with a lot of questions about other things. Is that you can see that veneration of the Theotokos began very early on. Um, there was already a heavy cultus at the time of Saint Epiphanius concerning her empty tomb. And there was even there's various speculations on how that occurred. This is also true about Saint John. So in those cases, there's no way to say that veneration of the Theotokos is in some way, shape, or form offensive. And this is where we have to. There's some stuff that we have to cover here because we do venerate the Theotokos as the mother of our God. What we don't do is we don't add on things to that. We believe that the Theotokos was immaculate. We consider that a mystery. We don't know if that occurred at her conception or when that occurred. We just believe she's all pure. And in that sense, you can say immaculate, but you can't say when that occurred. And more importantly, we do believe that her body was taken up into heaven. Um, and she's not the only one. And to somebody who says, "Well, why would Mary's body be taken up into heaven?" Well, you can answer back, "Well, why was Elijah's body taken up into heaven?" The point is, when people ask these questions, a lot of the time they don't even think it through. You're putting a pejorative down on the mother of God, and then a prophet can go up into heaven, but the mother of our Lord Jesus Christ can't. So, you have to practically think through some of the things that people are asking. And a lot of the time they just throw them out. I know that when I was discussing and debating with Matt Slick one time, and it was one of the early discussions we had, he tried to argue, so you're saying that Mary can hear your prayers all over the world? And I pointed out that we believe that about any saint in the Orthodox Church, not just the Theotokos, but any saint in the Orthodox Church can do that because they're united to God. And so this is the most important thing that you can do in that situation, um, because if you're in that if you're united to God, you're in union with Him, then you can do anything. And so, in any case, um, let's see here. Trying to think. I would recommend for everyone who is watching. I should just show for orthodoxinfo.com because it seems like almost every reference I want to get to is actually on Orthodox. Well, that's not true. A lot of the early fathers, a lot of the fathers of the church are going to be on archive.org. They're going to be on tertullian.org, CCEL if you use that one. So hold on one second. But in this particular case, one of the first things that I read, one of the best books, let me see here, is The Orthodox Veneration of Mary, the Birth Giver of God. Actually, no, this is not on orthodoxinfo.com, but it is on orthodox.dk. I guess that's Denmark. But it is in English, and you can get the book for free. So I'm going to put that link there, and we're going to hit live chat to see if I missed any chats and any questions. And so basically, that is a definite go-to book for, for looking at information about the veneration of the Theotokos in the Orthodox tradition. I've covered questions early. I actually did that first. I was going to cover, just real quickly, the oddity of this scenario, and then I think I'm going to cut it short for today because I'm not seeing Father Enoch, and I hate kind of talking into the air by myself. I see you guys, and I really recognize that, and I respect that, but as you can probably hear from my incredibly raspy voice, I'm pretty tired. But what I was going to touch on was it was a funny story in the last episode that I mentioned, but I realized it got to a much darker story, and I was originally going to title this episode "War World." And for anyone who's familiar with Superman comics and stuff, there's a reason I'm saying that. That was because the discussion that I got pulled on to Discord, where Matt Slick was on, I then discovered apparently I decided to go to Matt Slick's show the next day, and I decided to listen to see if he had anything to say about our short discussion or about discussion with Orthodox in general. And lo and behold, he did. He actually said that before, and here we go, we're going to mention a name that shall not be named, but apparently he was dragged onto the Discord to discuss with Jay Dyer, which makes me wonder whether Jay Dyer himself was asked to join the Discord, which would then mean that perhaps 3 to 4 people were called in a row. Some sort of like apologetics battle royale, if you will. And I don't know the motivations of the folks who are behind or doing that. I'm not, I'm not cool. I mean, I don't like. I like people just saying if you want to have a forum to debate, to create one. But kind of like just pulling people in like that, it makes me kind of question, the motivations. I'm not, we don't. I don't think myself or Matt or even Dyer. I don't think any of us have do this for entertainment purposes. So I don't want to be part of that sort of thing. If anyone wants to debate, I'm all for that. As I mentioned, we're debating Erica Barr next week. I don't have an issue with that. But um, again, this random kind of stuff kind of makes me a little nervous about the motivations. Is like, let's see them fight. Doesn't seem like a very good way to go with that. Past that, let's see here. I did want to make sure that you at least had a couple of good links, and definitely those two are very good links. The Orthodox veneration of the Mother of God goes from the birth and early life of the Theotokos all the way down to Roman Catholic errors concerning the Theotokos, and even points out how even in the early medieval period, things like the Immaculate Conception were opposed in the Roman Catholic Church. So, there's not a lot of consistency in the way that they do things. But what's important to remember is that the Theotokos, like every other saint of the church, she is a saint. And she's, it's someone to aspire to. It's someone we ask for their mediation, their intercession. And got to avoid the word mediation because that leads to a whole other thing. Then people accuse you of having multiple mediators. But the point is that you have to you should reach out to everyone who is alive within your spiritual family, and that includes people that appear, at early glances to have passed on. But it's also part of the reason that we do what we do. So anyway, it doesn't appear that there's much going on. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think this old boomer would love to debate Jay Dyer, especially about my age. Uh, because last I checked, he's only 4 years younger than me. Father Enoch is actually younger than Jay Dyer, but to call me an old boomer, I like the title. I think Boomer is a pretty cool name. I mean, I think there was some football player named Boomer once, but I have no problem with being referred to as everyone's favorite boomer. But in any case, I don't think there's much to debate. Even this recent War World thing that happened with Matt Slick, it was the exact same thing over and over again. You're retarded. You're retarded. You're retarded. Read a council. Hang up. Block. I mean, that's not a debate. That's not anything. But he does his thing. I don't really care. It's fine. If he ever wants to chat with us, he can. He knows how to reach us. He can pop right on this thing. But in any case, other than that, no. I think that's all I got. I'm pretty tired, and I'm doing all the talking. I didn't ask. I would have asked, Scooter or even Craig to join in had I known earlier that Father wouldn't be able to make it. But I assume he has good reasons because normally, if he can't make it, he'll tell me. But he was an hour ago was like, okay, I'll be there, and I'm hoping nothing bad happened. It's possible he just got busy. Someone came. It's a monastery, so you never know what's going to happen. But in any case, um, this one's going to be, I think, a little on the short side because unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to stick around for the next, three. I'll stick around for the next 10 minutes. I mean, if we get more questions, I will answer more questions. But I will stick around for a few minutes. And then maybe I'll get to bed early for once. So we'll see. But in any case, not much else there. Trying to think. On Twitter, I've been getting yelled at by Sedevacantis, and they're trying to now say they're nuts out of a contest, so that's just silly. And put up a picture of me. How very if only people hadn't been doing that to me already for 10 years, I might actually be bothered. But other than that, not much else going on. Trying to think. Oh yeah, hey, today Apologetics Day. Today is the feast, according to the Western Rite, of the Chair of Saint Peter in Antioch. You see, the Western calendar originally listed both the chairs, the Petri in St. Peter in Antioch and Alexandria, as well as the chains of St. Peter in Rome, indicating that the three C's, even in the calendrical use of the Western Rite, was Petri. That it was not just Rome, it was Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. So this is an interesting day. Today, we officially commemorate Antioch as the seat of St. Peter. So, something to remember whenever somebody says, well, St. Leo only meant that theoretically or something like that. No, it's on the calendar, guys. So that's you know, again, that's I guess if anyone has other questions, Scooter's there, he's saying you think of something to ask. All of you, that are listening, please feel free to throw anything in. Submit to the MTC. Yeah. Oh boy. The settings or something else. I actually found that Pope Michael, that guy who has like 7 followers in Colorado, I guess, and like they did a documentary on him. Like I found his Twitter address, so I told them like, why don't you just go join him? I mean, he just tweeted about having an oil change. That's Avignon level transparency. They all get together or something. But I don't know. I don't know if Pope Michael blocked me. Probably. But past that, not not much else going on, really. It's just that, I think. Let me see if there's anything new here moving on the Facebook things. And doesn't look like too much is going on there. Okay. Somebody wanted to talk about yep, okay. Somebody wanted to talk about the thing on the war zone. And that's it's not that's not my lesson. Somebody said you learned a great lesson, should have consulted St. Ambrose text because he brought up St. Ambrose. Well, yeah, the whole point, after you get to the question of faith, you must unflailingly believe in Christ and his church. The next step for every Orthodox apologist is context. I should not, and I'm not saying this like me personally, I'm frustrated or anything, but it's when you're trying to learn about apologetics, the one thing you don't need to ask is, what does a father mean when he says this? Because what you can do is you can go to that father's text and look at the full text, and then you'll know exactly what he means. Because they're not like the fathers they're not divine oracles like the scriptures. They're not difficulty. They're meant to explain the scriptures. Let me see here. When will we just name our own Patriarch of Rome? Well, that was kind of the original dream of the Milan Synod, since that was brought up. Because they got as close as Basilio of Ostia, and Ostia is actually a Roman. It's a Roman suffragancy, so they were getting close to that. They really were thinking like to do that, but the few people who have tried to put together a synod or convocation to name a Roman pope, whether for Orthodox or for if they get that close, usually the good folks in the Vatican and their security services will put an end to it pretty quick. So I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially since the Milan Synod is basically in pieces. Metropolitan and Nufria Synod in Italy is like, there's 2 bishops there, but again, it would take a lot more work. You'd have to make a whole new Metropolitan of Logios who could, he was a very dynamic individual in his early years. Whatever flaws he had, God rest his soul. And the point is that it'll take that level dynamic to see something like that even close. I'm just grateful we have our own Western Rite services, our own Western Rite Metropolitan, and our own autonomous church that's still in existence. So I'm happy. God save the RS. If someone's validly baptized but then leaves the church, can they then validly baptize someone else? Let's say in the case of the emergency. Well, that is actually in St. Augustine's argument. He uses that in a great deal. He says yes, that can occur, but the distance from the church becomes an issue. Now the question is, if they leave the church and I'm assuming you mean go into schism. I don't believe atheists, for example, can baptize. Because if they don't have the faith, how can it's not mechanical. And that's one of the things that I think most Orthodox would disagree with Roman Catholics on, is because they tend to see it mechanically. Anyone can say the words. No, that's not how it works. That also leads to the question of whether a Satanist who has valid orders, can validly confect the Eucharist. We would say no, that's impossible. Because there's a spiritual aspect to it, not simply a verbal or a legalistic aspect. And if there's no spiritual aspect in the giver, then how can there be a spiritual aspect in the receiver? So that's what I would say in that situation. But in any case, let me see here. What else have we got? This weekend is going to be interesting. I don't know who will be there for that, but I am going to try to hook up a Facebook Live feed to this Google feed. An Andrew Sluter, who is a Protestant Baptist who likes to debate people, I guess spoke to one of our listeners, or one of the members of the War Zone, and he was a new Orthodox, and I just decided, okay, fine, I'll talk to him. But he likes having debates apparently. So on Saturday at around 7, I'm supposed to do that. It will at least probably be linked to the War Zone, if not to this. I'm going to try to see if I can finally get the broadcasting software to work, and I'm able to feed from Facebook to Google Hangouts, so that everyone here will still be able to participate. It's just me, because I guess he uses a software called BeLive that only does 2 people or 4 people, or so it's just going to be me versus this fellow. And so that's about it there. And then of course we have next week's thing with Eric Ibarra. So I don't see any other questions. And so it's 9:42. It's been a short show. I admit it. I can't talk forever. I'm pretty tired, and you can all hear my raspy voice. I'm not like, just, I'm not just like, I'm pretty tired. Okay. Anyway, everyone here, thank you for listening. If you have other questions, feel free to hit us up in chat. Feel free to hit us up in the comments, so on and so forth, and we will gladly answer them. And so, everyone have a good night. Take care. Thank you.